Hey everybody, welcome to my second of two videos on this, the Minolta X-370, also called the 300 in markets that were not America. This video is going to look at how to do everything with this camera. By the end of this video, you should be really comfortable taking out this camera and using it for whatever you want to do. First thing we're going to do is look at how to change lenses. Lenses on this camera can be changed at any time. Well, I mean, not if you're in the middle of an exposure. But if you're between shots, you can change lenses on this camera and not worry about it ruining your film. So to remove a lens, if you have one on, you push this silver button here and you turn the lens counter or anti-clockwise and then remove it. To put it back on, you find this red dot, and you line it up with this red dot, and then you turn it clockwise, and you've mounted your new lens. Next thing we're going to do is talk about the battery, because there's nothing else we can do with this camera until we have the batteries in. So here's the battery chamber. I'm going to use a nickel, a US nickel, and I'm going to struggle to open this. Come on, there, almost got it. There we go. You just unscrew it, and the battery holder has in there an indicator of the way that the batteries are loaded into this. But the negative side, which is the side without the text, touches the bottom of this battery cap. So if you have it loaded properly, if you hold it like this, look down at it, and can read the text on your batteries. Then they just go into the bottom of the camera. And you just tighten this with, this should tighten very easily. If you try screwing this shut and there's resistance, back it out and start again, because you don't want to cross thread this, because that can make it impossible to undo this, or it can ruin the cap if you are able to get it off. So this should screw in very easily. Now once you have the batteries in, you can turn it to on, and it works. There we go. And I believe I mentioned in the first video that these things often have capacitors that get shot. This is a camera that I believe that I replaced the capacitor in. It's good to know that my work, it worked. This uses two batteries. They're LR44s, 357, A76, S76. They're all the same thing. They're all interchangeable, and all of them will work with this camera. Next, let's talk about how to load and unload film in your camera. First thing we need to do to load the film is open the film back. To do that, you lift this up until it pops. So you lift until it's about like this here, and then a little bit further, and it'll spring back into place. And that's the unlocking mechanism. You can see the hook moving right over here. We're gonna grab our roll of film and we're gonna drop it in like this. While you're looking at it, you can remember 200 ISO. Better set this to 200 so that I have that set correctly. Pull out a leader. We're gonna put it into this film take-up spool here, if I'm capable. There we go. And trigger the shutter. When you're loading film, it's better to have the shutter set to a specific number, because if you set it on automatic, you're not going to know how long the shutter speed is. Any number is fine, faster than about a quarter second. So after you trip the shutter, then you advance the film. You can see how that works. Close the film back. I'm going to take some tension out of this. There's not a whole lot in it. And then we're going to advance 3 frames. Watch here as I advance next time. And you'll know this is working if this spins as you advance the film. Now I've advanced 3 frames, and this says 1, which indicates that we're ready to start. You're advancing from the S to the 1 after you load the film. And you can see here that this is going to start to turn orange as we advance the film, letting you know that your film's in the process of being used. So once you load the film, film is one and done. So if you get to the end of your roll or halfway through it and then you open the film back, every photo you've taken will be erased. It'll be ruined. Once you load your film, keep the film back closed, go through your whole roll, and then rewind the entire thing before you open your film back again. So what I'm going to do is something you should definitely not ever do. But I want to show you what's happening inside the camera as you take pictures. So you take a picture, you activate the shutter. This film pressure plate right here sandwiches this film that's inside of it flat. You can see the inside guide rails here through the sprocket holes, and then you can see how it fits with the outside guide rails so it doesn't move up and down, and how this guide pin helps to guide it out of the cassette. So my fingers are going to do the job of the film pressure plate. Don't do this at home. I'm not pressing on the shutter, I'm pressing on the guide rails. So that holds it flat. And then this little doodad right here presses about there so that the film stays on the sprockets. You're going along, you're taking your photos, and you're getting through your entire roll of film. And eventually you're going to get to the end. And remember, again, the film back is closed this entire time. When you finish your roll, you're going to push this button right here. This is the film rewind button. And we saw earlier in the first video how the sprocket here does not spin freely. So I can't rewind it right now. But if I push the film rewind button, now I can rewind it. You don't have to hold it down, just pushing it is good. When you get to the end of the roll inside the camera, you'll hear a sound like this. That lets you know you're almost done. And then you just finish rewinding it. I'm going to leave a leader so I can use this film in future videos. But if you were rewinding this for real, you'd rewind the entire thing into the camera, then open up the film back, and then take this out. And if you're going to keep shooting, pop in your next roll and make sure that your ISO is set correctly. And that's the process. That is how you load film, how it goes through your camera, and then how you unload it. Next thing that we're going to talk about is flash photography with this camera. So this can use a flash, and if you look in your shutter speed dial, you'll notice that 60 is red. 60 is the fastest shutter speed at which you can use a flash. So 30th, 15th, a full second, all of these are just fine to use flash. Bulb, you can use a flash. But anything faster than a 60th, and you cannot use a flash and have the photo turn out. So that includes auto. If you're using auto, do not use a flash. If you want to use a flash, make sure that you're in 1/60th or slower. For most uses, 1/60th will be just fine for your flash setting. Your flash will go on the hot shoe. That's the only place for it to go. There's no PC port. So you just mount your flash like that, make sure that it's tightened down, and your flash is going to work. Now there's a couple things about flash technique. If your flash is set up like this, where it's pointing the same way as your lens, you're going to make your subjects, especially people, look like wax. So if you have a fixed flash that only points forward, that's going to be a challenge. If you have an articulating flash and you're indoors, you want to point your flash upward, because when we see people, whether it's outdoors under the sun or indoors underneath light, light shines down from above. So it's natural for us to see people with light shining from the top down. You want to replicate that with your flash. So if you shoot the light up at the ceiling and then bounce it back down onto your subject, your flash will replicate natural lighting, and it'll give your subjects, whether they're people or dogs or model cars, doesn't matter, a more flattering look than pointing the flash right at them. If you have a swiveling flash, that's great, not mandatory. The most important thing is to have one that goes up and down like this if you don't already have one and you're wondering what kind of flash to get. And it's more important with this camera because you can only put the flash on the hot shoe, and there's no option to easily have a flash off of the hot shoe with a PC cable connecting it to the camera. So why is it that you have to use 1/60th? Well, it's because of the way the shutter works. This has a focal plane shutter, which means it's got two cloth curtains, and when you take a picture, the first one opens and then the second one closes, and then when you advance the film, it resets like that. Well, at 1/60th, the first one opens, the entire frame is open to light for a very short period of time. Well, it's almost a 60th of a second, but you get the point. And then the second curtain closes behind it, repeat, okay? So if you're at 1/8 of a second, first curtain opens, then the entire frame is exposed to light for about 1/8 of a second, second curtain closes, repeat. But what if you're at 1/500th? Well, the shutter speeds don't change by the curtains physically moving faster or slower. They move by there being a gap. So at 1/500th, there'll be a gap like this as the shutter curtain trails very closely behind. So at this shutter speed, at anything faster than 1/60th on this camera, at no time is the entire frame exposed to light. So let's say you used a flash at 1/500th. First curtain would open, second would follow, flash. What's between my hands here would be exposed. Everything else would be blocked by the curtain, and dark. So you'd end up with a strip of exposed image, and then the rest of it would be nothing. It would be no image at all. So that's why your flash sync speed is 1/60th, and that's the fastest sync speed you can use. Let's look through the camera's viewfinder, and we'll see what it's telling us. Now, as you look through it, you'll see that there's a big, wide open focusing area. And in the middle is a split prism. Now, if you find a vertical line and you line it up so that the two parts of the vertical line in the prism area come together, now your image is going to be in focus on the plane of that vertical line. If you want something off to one of the corners to be in focus, just look at that corner on the matte field, and when it comes into focus on the matte field, then it's in focus. That's how the matte works versus the prism. Off to the right, there is a scale with numbers from B and then 1 up to 1/1000th. That's your shutter speed. So put your camera into auto mode, and you'll see at the top it says A in the window. Now, a light next to that, one of those numbers will be lit up. I'm looking at it right now and it says 1/30th to 1/60th. If there's one light lit up, your shutter speed is very near, in this case, 1/30th. If there's two lights lit up, then it's split between those two numbers. So if you have 1/30th and 1/60th lit up, your shutter speed is going to be about 1/45th. To meter in manual mode, switch it to one of your specific shutter speeds. Switch it off of A to, let's say, 1/60th. There will be an M at the top. That's telling you that you're manually selecting your shutter speed. What you see on the right side is your actual shutter speed, which is blinking, and then a solid light that tells you what your shutter speed should be. So if you have only a blinking light, you're metering correctly. If you're set at 1/1000th of a second, let's say, and you have a solid light at 1/15th, that means you need to set the shutter speed dial to 1/15th to get a proper exposure. And as you adjust the shutter speed dial, you don't even have to look at it to set it correctly, because you can follow the shutter speed by following the blinking light in your viewfinder. You'll also notice that if you adjust your aperture, then the solid light telling you what shutter speed you should use will change. So that's how you read the viewfinder and meter scenes with this camera, how you read the light meter and everything. It's very intuitive and very user-friendly, very easy and nice setup. So auto exposure only works when you're in auto mode. Auto and auto. They're connected. If you're in manual mode using one of the manually selected shutter speeds, auto exposure lock is going to do nothing for you at all. So here we go. Here's how you use auto exposure. Let's say that you're sitting in a cafe with a friend. You're underneath an awning, and then the area behind your friend is very illuminated. You're looking out at the ocean or a cityscape, whatever it is. It's bright sun, you're in the shade. If you just took a picture of that scene, your friend would be very dark and underexposed, and then the scene behind him or her would be very well exposed. That's not a look anybody wants for their photos of their friends. So you're sitting on the patio. Patio's probably concrete, it's probably a neutral tone. What you do is, you're in auto mode, you know which aperture you want to use, great. Point the camera down at the patio, hold down the auto exposure, use your middle finger because it's easier, hold down the auto exposure button, hold your camera up to your friend, and take your picture, well, at focus, and then take your picture. As long as you hold this down, it will remember the shutter speeds. If you adjust the aperture, it will not adjust the shutter speeds, so pick the aperture before you put this into memory. Then it will work. And the reason you meter off of something shaded like the patio floor ground is that that's a nice neutral tone. It will give you a proper meter reading, and then your friend will be properly exposed when you have saved the auto exposure data with this. The other thing you can do is meter off of the ground and manually set the shutter speed. The downside to that is that with the manual shutter speed, you only have the set speeds that are printed here. In auto mode, the camera will pick the best shutter speed regardless of what it is. You could pick 1/125th, But if the best shutter speed is 1/75th and a third, well, you don't have a setting for that. But in auto mode, the camera can do that. So that's the real value of using this, is that you're not limited to just the numbers on the dial. You can get a meter reading and save it for the perfect shutter speed for your lighting condition. The self timer is pretty easy to use. All you have to do is lift it up and hit your shutter button, and that light's going to flash, and it'll flash a little bit faster when we get closer, or it should anyway. There it goes. Goes solid, picture's taken. So that's how the self timer works. And then just make sure you turn this off when you're done, otherwise every photo you take is going to have a 10-second delay. That's really annoying. So we've looked at this. Let's go through everything we've talked about and talk about the process of how to take a photo with the Minolta X-370 or 300, whichever badge you have on yours. So in auto mode, it's really easy. All you have to do is set it to auto, select your aperture, focus on what you want to take a picture of, take a picture. That's it. You're going to look through your viewfinder and just make sure you're in focus and you're set. In manual mode, it's a little bit different. Think back to how the meter works, and what you want to do is come up with your aperture, let's say f/5.6, and your shutter speed, 1/125th works, and then just take the picture after you focus. Great. That's how you take a picture with the X370. It's really simple. What about a double exposure though? A double exposure is a slightly more complex process. First, let's talk about the science of it. If a proper exposure is 1/125th at f/5.6, and you take that picture and the light hits the frame, that's properly exposed. If you do a double exposure at 1/125th and f/5.6, assuming the same scene, and you take two pictures onto the same frame, it's going to be overexposed, very hard to work with. So you have to cut the amount of light in half. It's very easy in manual mode to do that. You need to go to 1/250th. It's a higher number, but it's a fraction, so it's actually half the time. You can adjust the aperture, but aperture is more important in how your image turns out than shutter speed, unless you're going for a manipulation of time in your image. Most of the time, adjusting your shutter speed is better than adjusting your aperture. So you've adjusted your shutter speed to cut half the light. You take your first picture. Flip this up because it's easier to hold. Hold down the film rewind button and advance. The advancing action arms the shutter, but holding this and holding this prevent the film from moving. Take your second frame, and you've completed your double exposure. Now you advance the film. You're not quite done with the process though. Let's bring it up to 1,000th of a second. We're going to put on the lens cap. We're going to stop it down to f/16 or 22, whichever lens you have, and then take a dead frame and advance it. You want to take a dead frame because after you take your double exposure, it takes a little bit of the advance action before all the gearing re-engages and advances the film. So that film isn't going to move an entire frame. So if you take another image, your second image is going to overlap part of your double exposure, and both of your images could be ruined. So you take the dead frame to help the film re-engage and to give you some blank space before your next actual photo. Okay, wonderful. What if automatic mode's what you like shooting in? Oh, this is easy too. Taking a double exposure in automatic mode means that you're going to have to trick the camera. So let's say you want to go with f/5.6. You don't want to adjust this. What you want to do is adjust your ISO dial. Again, we're going to need half as much light because we're taking two images on the same frame. We have 200 ISO film in here. We need half as much light. That's 400. 400 needs half as much light as 200 to get the same image. So for your double exposure, you set the film ISO to one stop faster, which is one number higher, or double the number of your actual film ISO. And now, in auto mode, you take your first picture, grab this, hold the rewind button, advance, take your second picture. If you're done, you then want to make sure you set it back to the actual ISO that you're shooting, otherwise all the rest of your photos will end up underexposed. You advance your film, And then you take your dead frame again. The dead frame is mandatory whether you're shooting in manual or automatic mode because you need it to give you that spacing. So that's it. That is the Minolta 370. Everything this camera can do out of the box without any of the accessories. If this is your first camera, you've got a really good first camera on your hands. It's a nice camera to use. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm producing content which is helpful and useful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm more than happy to answer those. I check every day or two. If you have suggestions also, please leave those. If you'd like to, please subscribe so that you can find out when I have more videos about photography and cameras. And one last thing, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.